Madam Chair, for allowing me to sit in here and audit your class. I've learned more about football today than I thought I'd ever know. Mr. Cook, I know you were at NASA for a few years during the Obama administration when Lori Garver served as deputy administrator. I would remind the committee that Ms. Garver is one of the architects of the policies that actually terminated the Space Shuttle and the follow-on Constellation program, which wound up resulting in our dependence on the Russians for access to the International Space Station since 2011, almost a decade now. Mr. Cook, she has penned an op-ed, Ms. Garver has, on July 18th, 2019, about NASA's purview, in her opinion. Have you read that article by chance?
I don't recall it right off.
Okay. Well, she read it's 2 days before the Apollo 11 anniversary, where she advocates actually for the termination of NASA's human exploration programs and the return to the moon, which she calls, quote, meaningless new goals, end quote, and said NASA should instead be turned into an agency to study global warming. And you've not read that article. It's Washington Post, July 18th, 2019.
I did read it. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't remember.
Becoming a bit more familiar, sounding a bit more familiar now. Based on your experience, you've been around a long time, 45 years, as I read your bio in the space program. Based on that experience, does it surprise you that she would be advocating against NASA's human spaceflight programs and to focus NASA basically on global warming research at the expense of the space program?
I don't want to get into differences, of that nature necessarily, but it doesn't really surprise me. I obviously
that's fair enough.
I feel differently. Obviously.
Sure, obviously, and I appreciate that. Do you perceive any danger of that actually happening?
I honestly don't know. I think that you all in Congress have kept us on a course in human exploration for a long time and have been the conscience of various ideas that have floated in and out. I know that while I was an associate administrator and had the Constellation program at that time.
I read that.
And it was Congress that led us to where we are today with the Space Launch System in Orion.
Absolutely. Let me follow up that with Mr. Bowersox in an exchange. Congressman Wall said he cringes when he thinks that it takes 6 years to build a spacesuit. So, Mr. Bowersox, as NASA is preparing for a crewed lunar landing and a pressing need to upgrade the extravehicular mobility unit, spacesuits used for ISS spacewalks, they need to be upgraded as well. How will NASA prioritize each of those efforts if they have a constrained budget environment?
Well, the good thing is they sort of go together. The way we've got the program set up now, the components we develop that can be used on the lunar surface can also be used at the ISS, and we would test them at the ISS first, at the station first.
But should it take 6 years, really?
There's a certain amount of time that things take in the aerospace world, and 4 to 6 years seems to be about what you get, no matter how much money you throw at it. I would like it to be faster, and we're looking for ways to be faster.
Okay. Are there roadblocks along the way that you can identify, or is that just it? It takes 4 to 6 years, and you're just resigned to it taking 4 to 6 years. So, is there anything we can do to shorten that time frame?
I think you guys are giving us plenty of support, and we appreciate it. I think our folks at JSC have been working on it plenty of years now, and so with the right resources, I think we might be able to accelerate it some.
Okay. Do you know where we are currently in that timeline?
Yes, sir. Right now, we'll have the suits developed and tested in time for an Artemis lunar landing and a test on ISS somewhere between now and then.
So that's a long way of saying we're somewhere between now and then.
Yeah, so roughly 5.5 years from now.
Okay. Mr. Posey posed the question about the 130-ton capacity SLS. How many with all the equipment that we would have to move up for the lunar, the moon, to be deposited up there and work, how many trips will that take? Any idea?
With our current plan, it would take one launch of the SLS with the Orion. The crew would go up. But prior to that launch, we'd position the stages for the lander, which could be somewhere between 2 and 3. And then depending on what we need for additional supplies, we might have an additional mission. So somewhere between 3 and 4 small launches.
Will that be the prototype to also go to Mars? And what's the gravity difference between Mars and the Moon? Do you know offhand?
Mars is roughly 4/10 of the gravity on Earth. The Moon's roughly 1/6
Right.
the gravity
Okay.
of Earth. For Mars, we would probably see similar type of launch rates, but very likely with the bigger vehicles, with
Right.
whatever large cargo vehicles are available.
And I know I'm over time, but one last question. You spent 200 and something days on ISS?
Well, only about 150 some on our.
Not that you were
ISS.
counting.
Yeah.
So we're now
I would have
talking,
liked to stay longer.
so now we're talking about a trip to Mars that takes how many days?
Well, in some of our estimates, it could be 3 years.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your indulgence, and I yield back.